This is my recipe for Karahi Gosht, guys. I make this using lamb, but you can also use mutton. And this is one of the very few curries that doesn't include onions in the gravy. So let's get started and I'll show you how to make this delicious dish. To begin with, I measure out all the spices into a small bowl. I'm starting with 2 teaspoons of red chilli powder, followed by 1.5 teaspoons of black pepper powder, and then I'm going in with 1 teaspoon of cumin powder, another teaspoon of coriander powder, half a teaspoon of turmeric powder, 1 teaspoon of onion seeds, and then finally 2.5 teaspoons or 1 tablespoon of pink Himalayan salt. Give these spices a mix and then just set aside whilst we cook the lamb. A karahi is actually a wok, and that's traditionally what this recipe would be cooked in. As I don't have a wok, I am just using a standard pot to cook this in. It's not necessary, but it's obviously more authentic if you do have a wok to use that. So pour in either 1 cup of melted ghee or olive oil like I'm doing here, and then just allow this to heat up on a medium flame before you go in with the lamb. Now add in 1 kilo of lamb. I'm using a mixture of boneless and on the bone lamb. The majority of it is on the bone, and you want to use a really good quality lamb for this. Honestly, it makes all the difference. Give it a good stir, ensure all of the lamb is sort of touching the bottom of the pan so you've got a layer of it, and then you just want to let it sort of sear on one side before we start mixing it together. One of the things about this dish, as I mentioned at the beginning, is there's no onions, so we're not having to make a gravy beforehand. We will do that towards the end, which is a little bit different to most of my typical curries, but honestly it's just as delicious. As the lamb starts to cook on one side, you'll see it releasing its own water. That's when you just want to sort of give it a mix so that the uncooked and unseared sort of pieces of lamb get a little bit of colour on them. Whilst your lamb is cooking away, you want to peel, wash and dry 1 entire bulb of garlic. There's a lot of garlic that goes into a karahi, and then into your pestle and mortar you just want to bash it until it sort of releases its flavour and aroma, and you want to get it to a paste as close as possible, but it will cook down in the actual pot itself, but try and get it as close as you can to a paste. I prefer doing it in a pestle and mortar rather than in a machine. I just feel like it's just so much more authentic like this. To this I also grated in some fresh ginger, probably around about a 4 by 4 centimetre cube, roughly. It was about a tablespoon of minced ginger. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put both the ginger and garlic into the lamb, which has been now cooking probably for around about 20-25 minutes, if that, on a low heat, just sort of simmering away in its own juices and just searing on both sides of the meat. Now mix that ginger and garlic into that lamb and cook this on a medium heat for approximately 4 minutes roughly, so just bubbling away before you add the spices. So you know all those spices that we measured out earlier, you want to add those into the lamb and give it a good mix. As the lamb starts bubbling away, you want to add around about 600 millilitres of water, or 2.5 cups, and bring it to the boil. Once it's reached boiling point, you want to cover the pot, turn the heat down to a low simmer and allow this to simmer for 30 to 40 minutes at least. In the meantime, place your tomatoes in a heat-proof bowl and submerge them in boiling hot water and pop the lid on. What we're hoping to do is just loosen the skins from the tomatoes, and submerging them in hot water will help to do this. Everyone has their own method of doing this, and this is my favourite. Now, drain that hot water after about 5 minutes, and then using a knife, you just want to peel that skin away from the tomatoes. It should be really easy because that skin has softened. Let me show you how I do this, and I'll slow this video down for you. So you want to cut like a cross into the top of the tomato and then remove the skin from each segment. This will hopefully just make it easier because you've got something to hold on to. And the tomatoes still hold their shape, surprisingly. And then once you've done this, we want to chop the tomatoes up. So let's fast forward to the end. Oh, and the other thing I forgot to mention to you as well is that I don't like using tinned tomatoes for this. Fresh for a karahi, always, just because there isn't the onion in the gravy that's carrying the sauce. So you want fresh tomatoes that'll give you thickness and freshness, which tinned tomatoes might not do. And once you've peeled them all, you just want to chop them up just roughly, and ensure you don't include the tops of the tomatoes. Nobody wants a big thick chunk of tomato that they can't actually eat in their curry. Now that you chop your tomatoes, you want to go back to the lamb, remove the lid, and as you can see, once that steam disappears, the oil has kind of risen to the top, so that gravy's been cooking really well. At this point, your lamb should have cooked through. If you need to give it a little bit longer, just pop the lid back on, leave it on a simmer. But if it is cooked through, add your tomatoes that you've just chopped up. Give this a good mix, and then you need to again leave this on another simmer so that the tomatoes can sort of infuse into the gravy. At this stage, you can pop the lid back on and allow those tomatoes to cook whilst it simmers away. Once your tomatoes have disintegrated and become more of a sauce, you can now add the bullet chilies. I've used about probably about 10 here, I think. And then finally, half a teaspoon of garam masala, which we always add at the end of the handi before we serve. And you just want to sort of give this a stir. Remove as much moisture as you can because karahis traditionally are very sort of dry curries, and they don't tend to have a lot of sauce. So you want to get rid of the water and cook it out. And then when you're happy with it, just serve. And there we have it, lamb karahi or karahi gosht. But you can also use mutton for this. I've not tried this particular recipe with chicken. I'm going to share my mum's version of karahi chicken with you guys soon, inshallah. And yeah, hope you enjoy it. Leave me feedback if you do try this recipe, and don't forget to subscribe and follow.